The first time Bobby the Brain Heenan felt truly betrayed, it wasn't in a crowded arena or beneath the blinding lights of national television. It was in the quiet, deceptive stillness of an office. One handshake, one promise, one lie. That's all it took to tear his life apart. Most fans only saw Heenan's brilliance at ringside. What they didn't see was the man behind the curtain, constantly sabotaged by the very industry he helped define. It was 1979. Bobby, at the peak of his popularity in the AWA, received an offer that seemed too lucrative to refuse: Georgia Championship Wrestling, under the stern gaze of Ole Anderson. Anderson was a war-weathered man of the old school, feared by peers and loathed by many. Heenan was told it was a long-term deal. He uprooted everything: his family, his career, his legacy, and just as quickly, Anderson cast him aside. Bobby was stunned. He had left stability for an illusion. Ole denied promising anything, brushing it off as just business. But to Bobby, it wasn't business, it was betrayal. That moment sparked something dark in him, a distrust that would fester and grow with every handshake that followed. When he returned to the AWA, he wasn't just Bobby the Brain anymore. He was Bobby, the cynic, and this was just the beginning. Years passed, and the industry changed. But betrayal, it seemed, followed Bobby like a shadow. One name that clawed at his memory was Terry Taylor, the so-called Red Rooster. A gimmick so absurd it bordered on humiliation. But what made it worse was the backstage politics that dripped behind every flap of those ridiculous arms. Rumor had it Taylor was a sycophant, always whispering to the right people, stepping over the wrong ones. Vince McMahon, ever the puppeteer, allegedly gave Taylor that gimmick as punishment. But who was forced to legitimize it? Bobby. He was paired with Taylor, forced to paint gold on garbage. Bobby loathed the gimmick, and more than that, he loathed Taylor. Especially after what happened later in WCW, a betrayal so personal, Bobby refused to speak of it in detail. Whatever it was, it hurt. Still, none of these men compared to the one who made Bobby fear for his life, the Ultimate Warrior. To the fans, Warrior was a neon god, an electric blur. But to Bobby, he was a reckless, dangerous egotist masquerading as a wrestler. Heenan had long suffered from neck injuries. At WrestleMania 5, he warned Warrior not to touch him. Warrior ignored him, threw him anyway. The pain was real, the disrespect unforgivable. Heenan returned backstage bruised and enraged. When he confronted Warrior, the man just smirked. No apology, no remorse. Years later, when Bobby was fighting throat cancer, Warrior spat one final insult, calling his illness karma. It was beyond cruelty. It was sadism. But Bobby wasn't just a manager. He was a genius on commentary. Still, even that role brought him no peace. He tried to find chemistry with Tony Schiavone, but the connection never clicked. Unlike the elegant dance he performed with Gorilla Monsoon, his time with Schiavone was jagged, tense. And in 1999, at the worst possible time, that tension snapped. Gorilla Monsoon had died. Bobby wanted to honor his friend. Tony shut him down. Why? Because Monsoon had never worked for WCW. Corporate rules over human loss. That moment cracked something in Bobby. When UCW fired him a year later, Tony didn't even call. Management told him not to, and Tony obeyed. But something more disturbing was lurking. Something that would nearly end Bobby's career, live on air. His name? Brian Pillman. Bobby Heenan was no stranger to chaos. But Brian Pillman brought a new kind of madness. It was 1996. WCW was thriving on the surface, but beneath that glittering gold was a rotting foundation. And Pillman, immersed in his loose cannon persona, was the match hovering over gasoline. One night, in a moment nobody saw coming, he walked to the commentary desk and wrapped his hands around Bobby's neck. It was meant to be performance. It became a trigger. Heenan's body froze, his instincts screamed, and then, for the first time in decades, Bobby swore on live television and stormed off. His neck, injured years ago, was not a prop. It was a time bomb, and Pillman had set it off. Brian apologized profusely backstage, but the damage had been done. Bobby never looked at him the same way again. The betrayal wasn't just physical. WCW had become a graveyard of professionalism, and in its darkest corners, Heenan saw the face of its decay, Eric Bischoff. To Bobby, Bischoff was no Vince McMahon. He wasn't a builder, he was a borrower, borrowing Ted Turner's money, borrowing the NWO idea, borrowing time. Heenan pitched ideas. Bischoff laughed them off. "You're just an announcer," he told Bobby. That phrase echoed like a death sentence. Just an announcer. From the man who had shaped careers, invented heat, and could work a crowd better than anyone alive. Week after week, Bobby showed up, called the shows, and then faded into silence. Feedback? None. Appreciation? Zero. WCW didn't value minds, it valued moments. Bobby watched from ringside as the company devoured itself from within. But the worst moment was yet to come. When WCW finally collapsed, Heenan felt nothing but relief. The company that had killed his love for wrestling was gone, and yet he was left hollow. Bobby, once the man everyone wanted by their side, was now a memory floating between corporations that no longer knew what they had lost. But in the silence that followed his departure, whispers began. People started questioning his bitterness. Was Bobby the victim, or had his arrogance burned bridges he never meant to cross? The truth lay buried in stories few dared to tell, and in Part 3, those stories rise from the ashes. Bobby Heenan, older and wiser, didn't crave sympathy, but he demanded truth, and the truth was brutal. Wrestling had taken everything from him, his health, his friends, his trust, but it had also given him the one thing he prized above all else: immortality. As he battled throat cancer, fans poured out their love. Wrestlers he had berated on camera now called him a legend, but some names stayed silent. One of them was Warrior. Even after death, Bobby's wounds remained. He began to give interviews, cold surgical dissections of his past. Ole Anderson, a miserable man. Terry Taylor, a liar. Tony Schiavone, a pig. Warrior, the worst thing to happen to wrestling. These weren't petty insults, they were final judgments. And yet, through it all, Bobby never turned bitter. He remained sharp, even as cancer stole his voice. His mind, the very brain that made him a legend, remained untouched. And in those quiet, reflective moments, Bobby revealed the secret he had hidden for decades. He never wanted to be the villain. He became one because the business needed it. He played the bad guy so well that even the real villains believed he was one of them. But now, with the smoke cleared and the matches over, Bobby Heenan stood alone in a hall of ghosts. Not a manager, not an announcer, not a villain. A prophet. And yet, one final question remained. A question that even Bobby, with all his wit and wisdom, never answered. In an industry built on lies, who really tells the truth when the cameras stop rolling? What do you think?